our focus remains on the Middle East and the ceasefire that has been demanded by the Arab nations in the Arab Islamic Summit that has just concluded yesterday. Now, in wake of the certain developments are coming in, there has been pressure that has been mounted by Iran, by Turkey, by Qatar to the de facto OIC leader, that is Saudi Arabia, and its ally UAE to sever all ties, economic and diplomatic, with Israel. There have been demands that have been made by these nations to stop providing Arab airspace to the Israelis. There's also been mention of using oil as a leverage against Israel. There are sanctions that have been proposed by all these nations in a bid to mount pressure on the OIC de facto head, which is Saudi Arabia. However, these tactics have not really yielded these nations against Israel. So the big question being, why has such a tepid response been brought forth by an Arab nation which has categorically called for a ceasefire in Gaza? It has time and again questioned Israel's intentions on carrying forward this onslaught that has led to humanitarian crisis and the people of Gaza, the Gazans, as a collateral damage. We'll try to discuss this and break this down in our telecast. Let's start off this conversation with Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee. Ambassador, the situation is tense, but in wake of UAE and Saudi Arabia steadfastly standing in support of Israel in a bid to maintain diplomatic and back channels to ensure that there is dialogue that continues to happen in a bid to push for the demand of a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Gautam, the same question to you.
The main thing is it shows that Gaza is being put in its own box. 7, 8 countries have voted not to break ties with Israel and continue to work with them for improvement in Gaza, but they also see Israel as something important for their future. This was inevitable because the Hamas terrorism is not liked by a majority of the countries that matter in the Gulf, at any rate, led by Saudi Arabia and UAE. And this is now apparent. Egypt as well. So, these are countries which are very concerned, but they are not about to go to the extent of cutting off ties once again with Israel, using oil pressure and other such tactics as recommended by some of them.
Correct. And to name the nations that have supported Saudi Arabia and UAE and continuing to have normalized ties with Israel include Jordan, Egypt, Bahrain, Morocco, Djibouti, Mauritania and Yari. And I would like to put in one more very important aspect to this set of development that has taken place. Why is it that a large percentage of the OIC nations are in support of Israel, despite the condemnation that they have made over the humanitarian crisis that has been created in Gaza Strip, is the fact that they are wary of the sinister and vested interests of Iran. There had been a Houthi attack that had taken place in Saudi against UAE, against Abu Dhabi. Back in the day, this was supported by Yemen. There have been attacks that have been orchestrated by Iran into these Arab nations, and therefore their hesitation to bend over backwards to then accede to the demands that are being made by Iran and its allies, Turkey and Qatar and other such nations. Now, Ambassador, Baswati Mukherjee also on the telecast with me. Now, Ambassador, interesting set of events. We were all talking and sort of wary as to whether the Israel-Hamas war is then going to break down all talks between Saudi Arabia and UAE and Israel in terms of normalization of association between both the nations, even before there is a separate Palestine that is created.
I think it's very important to understand that the leaders of the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, etc., never had a comfortable relationship with Hamas per se. Their relationship was with the Palestinian Authority, and actually it was the Israeli right-wing government under Netanyahu who undermined the Palestinian Authority and built up Hamas, because they thought that in this Machiavellian tactic, it will be to the long-term security of Israel, a strategy that has blown up in their face. As far as the Arab countries are concerned, particularly Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, as you rightly pointed out, Megha, first of all, they have Arab countries who are not necessarily comfortable with Saudi Arabia's leadership, and they support Iran. So that is one constraint which Saudi Arabia and UAE have to look at when they look at their overall ties with Israel. Secondly, there are huge strategic issues here. Before the attack by Hamas on Israel on the 7th of October, we were looking at a Middle East, Europe, India corridor. We were looking at normalization of relations between key Arab countries and Israel, etc., which Hamas has completely upset. So whatever they say in public, it does not necessarily mean that Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates support the Hamas attack on Israeli civilians, nor, of course, can they support the huge civilian casualties on Palestinians now as a result of the Israeli offensive on the Gaza Strip. So it's a complex situation, but what has happened, and I heard what Gautam was saying when I joined, what has happened is absolutely what was to be expected. There is no way in which Saudi Arabia, which is also a strategic and key ally of the United States, would tilt the balance in a way that Israel would be completely diplomatic isolated. In fact, in my perspective, it gives Israel valuable breathing time so that they can finish the operations in the Gaza Strip as soon as possible and leave the way open for some kind of negotiations which would result in civilians being able to leave, in humanitarian aid reaching, and some kind of a deal which is presently being brokered on release of the hostages. How many of them are still alive, it is not clear, but let's hope that a large number are still alive, and to secure their release. And after the release of the hostages, then it would be possible to have some kind of political settlement of this issue. So it's a very important signal, Megha. I'm glad we're discussing it. It actually shows the thinking of the Saudis and the UAE through this complex maze of subterranean politics, which led to the Hamas strike in the first place. Megha.
Okay. All right. Let me go across to the other panelist on the discussion table here. I have with me Professor D.K. Giri. Now, Professor, quickly an understanding of how this pans out for India. What is the India perspective? What is India going to gain out of this normalization of ties, which has been for now put at halt, but the likelihood of it resuming very soon?
Well, India has played its cards very well. It has dehyphenated the traditional Israel-Palestinian, combined for India. So it is dealing with Israel independently and Palestinians and Arabs separately. So, and if you see the I2 and U2, it was a big step forward, Israel, India, and UAE and US. And the deal between Saudi Arabia and Egypt was on cards, which Iran panicked. It is not just the Hamas, it is their masters actually, the actual, Hezbollah and Hamas, their masters Iran. So they provoked them to carry out this attack on horrific attack on 7th of October, so that the peace, the normalization process is derailed between these two Arab countries. And Arab countries, it is not complex now, it has always been complex. The Arab unity is a chimera actually, they were never united. The Iran and Iraq fought for decades, and now it is Iran and Saudi Arabia. And of course, Erdogan raising agents to be the leader of the Muslim countries. So Palestinians are not there concerned about. It is their own intra-Arab geopolitics that is really pulling them down. So what happened in the meeting yesterday was not unexpected, and the countries have opposed completely severing ties with Israel. Dialogue and negotiation is the way forward. By cutting off with Israel, you are not helping anybody, really. And they are there, and the two-way solution is a way forward. Two-state solution is a way forward, and that should happen. And so Arab countries, by Iran really trying to instigate through terrorism, is absolutely an exercise in lunacy and futility, and that should be condemned as well. You know, Hezbollah, the Islamic jihadists, and Hamas and Houthis in Syria. I mean, these kind of radical elements, patronized by Iran is absolutely despicable. And India should call it out. Yeah.
Okay, let me get in an Israeli voice. I have with me Eli Nach. He's the deputy mayor of Ashdod. He joins me on the telecast. Eli, I want to understand the larger geopolitical spectrum of Israel in the Middle East right now. There was an Arab Islamic Summit that took place on the 11th. Saudi Arabia and UAE have continued to support Israel amidst the mounting pressure from Iran and Turkey and other allies.
I think the regional conflict in the Middle East and between the Arab countries and themselves, as between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the conflict is much more severe than maybe even the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, you need to understand. And even in the summit, there was a gathering, a lot of countries who have their own interests, who are contradicting with the interests of each other. They just could not let themselves not to be presented in this summit. It doesn't mean that this summit is actually going to execute some active role in this conflict. You need to understand. Also, the process of normalization with Israel and other Muslim Arab countries that started with UAE and other countries, and hopefully it will normalize our relationship also with Saudi Arabia, bring us to the position that maybe the peace process of this normalization will not happen tomorrow with Saudi because of this conflict, but we need to understand that they see what's destabilization that is going on right now in the Middle East. The main factor of it is Iran. We saw just yesterday when United States aircraft attacked Iran bases in Syria, and I don't think there is a question of on which side Saudi Arabia, on the United States side or the Iran. And I think that this coalition of normal Western world and normal Islamic countries, including UAE, including Saudi Arabia, including Israel, this is the coalition that don't want to see terror in the Middle East.
Okay.
And
but also you know, Ali, the point is that while UAE and Saudi have not taken these demands for sanctions, you know, not providing Arab airspace to Israelis, using oil as a leverage against Israel to pressure it to ensure there is ceasefire in Gaza, but at the same time, the Arab nations and the OIC has continued to demand from Israel that there needs to be a permanent ceasefire. There cannot be some hours in a day that can be used as humanitarian ceasefire pauses.
It's important to say, as I said before, all these declarations are empty, and most of those countries understand that there is nothing behind them except some sort of symbolic solidarity with other Arabs because they cannot ignore this kind of participation in this summit as being part of this world. And yet it's extremely important to mention that the differences between the countries, the one like Turkey and Iran, who wish to see destabilization in this region in the Middle East, and they are on the pro-Russian China coalition, are completely different with other countries who want to see normalization, who wants to see prosperity, who wants to see economical development, as Saudi, as Arabic Emirates and other countries in this region. That's why, although all of them participated in some events, although there was some sort of a declaration that is more humanitarian, symbolic act of solidarity, if we are going a little bit farther and looking at it, what are the countries are planning to do, on how they're planning to act, we understand that they are giving a completely space for Israel to keep doing its work and get rid of the Hamas.
Okay, fair enough. Ambassador Mukherjee, a very interesting point that has been put out by Eli. He says, if the Arab world and the OIC falls in the trap of the narrative that is being built by Iran and Turkey, it invariably falls in the evil axis or the bloc that China and Russia are also part of. So that's the huge dilemma that the world, even the West, has to at this point of time contemplate and take a look back and think.
Well, I agree, it's a very important and valid point, and I don't see the major Arab states falling into that trap. But at the same time, it is also important for Israel to appreciate that had the two-state solution been implemented in some way, and had there been some kind of effort to strengthen moderate elements in the Palestinian Authority, rather than encouraging Hamas so as to undermine the Palestinian Authority, there would have been a much better chance of a faster Arab-Israeli reconciliation. In other words, the point I'm making to our Israeli colleague is that perhaps the strategic issue here is for Israel to carefully strategize now to try and build up the moderate elements so that there can be some kind of a face saver for the Palestinians, so that the major Arab states can move towards full reconciliation and diplomatic ties with Israel. This has to be done, of course, not on television channels, but behind doors. It can be done with the assistance of the United States, of course. India is always there to help as a great friend of Israel. But this has to be worked out, because otherwise, and I agree with our Israeli colleague, we are just ceding strategic space to China.
Yeah.
So to stop that, there has to be some kind of what we in Asia call a face saver, and I'm sure our Israeli colleague is aware of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
A face saver is very important in order to have a solid peace agreement which will bring Israel as it deserves into the Middle East, into the Middle East politics, into the multilateral arena. I've been in the UN for 22 years. Israel does not belong to any regional group, because the Europeans don't accept Israel and the Arabs don't accept Israel. We would like Israel to be a full-fledged partner and member of the international community, and that can only happen if these developments take place. Megha.
Absolutely, very valid point put out, and truly exactly the way how diplomats and diplomacy works in very sensitive situations such as these, an all-out overture that is already being made by Saudi Arabia, by UAE, Jordan, Morocco, Egypt, and all these nations who are moderate Islamic nations, as opposed to the extremism that is being witnessed with terrorism that emanates out of Qatar and Iran and Turkey.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.